managing local state with Apollo. And my idea is that you should GraphQL all the things that you can use with GraphQL, you should use them with GraphQL. I'm a very strong advocate for GraphQL. So in here, who has used GraphQL at all? Okay, cool. Who has used it with React? Okay, cool. Okay, so managing local state with Apollo. Okay, cool. I am really excited about this. I really like this. So like I said, my name is Sarah. I'm a developer advocate at YLD. I don't really know what a developer advocate does, but they made me one, and now I go to people and teach them about stuff, I guess. Yep. I'm really into horrible, horrible movies, like Sharknado. Like, I don't know why, but like watching people fail on screen makes me happy for some reason. I never said I was a really good human being. I'm also really into football. So if you're watching the World Cup, I'm really into football. I've been traveling a lot, but when I'm not traveling, I actually live in a place that has less people than the Apollo Slack, which I'm not sure is sadder for me or them, because they have to manage a Slack that has 6,922 members, which is a lot of human beings. I live in a small town near Porto, which has about 5,000 people. This is from 2011. Most of them probably immigrated by now, so it's probably like 2,000. I have no idea. We all immigrate. It's our time. It's our turn now. So first of all, I want to do a small alert, which is that I don't like Redux. I am sorry, the guy that did the last talk. I'm really sorry. Like, I don't like Redux. I started using React with Redux because it was when I started using React, we changed an application from Angular 1. Hashtag remember Angular 1, that was a thing. And we moved it to React. And so we started using it with Redux because it was like the most normal way of doing things. And I was fine with it at the start, but then I realized that I was actually changing 4 files to change an object, and I got really annoyed. And I realized that was a whole lot of boilerplate that I didn't need in my life. I want to clarify that Dan is a great guy. Like, he's so nice. He's incredibly nice. You can try to like annoy him, and it's impossible. He's just nice. He's just such a good human being. He wrote posts about you may not need Redux, and I was like, shit, now it's cool to not like Redux. One thing that actually has happened to me about like 3 times in the past year was that somebody came to me and was like, so we got this really, it's usually recruiters, but it doesn't matter. So we got this really awesome React project that is like, oh, Apollo, we use GraphQL, we're really cool, we live on the edge, we haven't updated Lodash in 3 years. And I'm like, okay, that sounds awesome, but like, what do you use for state management? They always tell me that they use Redux. I think there was one guy who told me MobX, but the same idea. They're like, what do you use for state management? Redux. And I'm like, dude, no, why? There are better solutions to this. There is a better solution to this, which is what I am presenting today. Yeah, why? Don't. Just DQL all the things. And so there is this tool created by Apollo. It has a lot of contributors, mostly created by Peggy Raises. And it's called Apollo Link State. And it does exactly what Redux does, but with 1 file. I know, right? So you're like 3 times more productive. I'm sorry, man, I just don't like Redux. I hope you left. Yay. You didn't leave. So how? How do you do this? Okay, so first thing that I want to talk about is Apollo Boost. Who's heard of Apollo Boost? Cool, nice. So, remember this, which is like when Apollo changed to version 2, they had this great idea of splitting their packages so that you could do things to their packages, but no one did things to their packages, they just want to use them. So it happened with that, you had to install all, oh, there's yarn add twice. Okay, just ignore the first 2 words. You had to install all of this stuff just to use Apollo with React, which is a really annoying thing. And the thing is, I don't remember the 3 functions that Redux has. I am not gonna remember this, like, no way. I still have this in like, I have a clipboarder app for Mac, which has this as in like a snippet. The many times that I've used this. Okay, I can't remember this. I'll never remember this. So now, you can just like, there is this tool called Apollo Boost, which is like a package that has all the other packages. It uses some like defaults, kind of like Webpack 4 or like defaults. It's great. And you just install Apollo Boost, you install GraphQL, and you install React Apollo, and that's it. Apollo Boost was created, again, by the Apollo team and by Peggy Raises, and it's great. So how do you actually instantiate it? So first thing you got to do is obviously import React, and then the default export from Apollo Boost is Apollo Client, which is what you instantiate here. Is like it's a class, so you do new Apollo Client and you pass all your stuff inside. By default, it comes with the URI property, which is the one you pass to get stuff from the cloud, and then the state property, which is the one that you use for the thing that I'm going to talk about. And you import the Apollo provider and do the fancy thing here, which all the libraries do. Cool, done, that's it. That's all you need to do to set up React Apollo now, which is really nice. God bless Peggy Raises and the all Apollo team, yay. Okay, now let's actually talk about Apollo link state. Okay, like I said, the Apollo client comes with two things by default, a URI and a client state. And there is defaults and resolvers, and you're like, what? Gotcha, fams. So defaults is your base state. If you use Redux or MobX or any type of management of state, you always need to have a default state, which may even be an empty object, it doesn't matter, but you need a default state. And then, well, okay, no. So you have, in this case, I used supported a class called defaults, which has a state called, because all we're gonna do is just open and close a modal, because I'm very creative. That's why I became a programmer. So you have defaults, and inside you have a modal, and I just have like modal is open and is set to false. And I have this type name, which is, the reason that this exists is because of the Apollo cache. So the Apollo cache usually creates this by default when you get stuff from the cloud. But in this case, since you're manually creating it, you kind of have to give it a type name so that it works properly. It works as an ID for them, basically. It's really nice. It's cool. So resolvers. If you ever created a GraphQL API, this is the same exact thing. So this is where the magic happens. Like, basically, this is where you pass in a function that changes the state, and that's it. So I don't remember the name of the thing in Redux, but it's like that. Okay, so what's the idea of the resolver? So resolvers work the same way, as in like they have mutations and queries. In this case, I'm using a mutation that will open the modal. The first parameter usually doesn't really matter. Like, it's the parent query or the parent mutation, which 90% of the times you won't need. The other 10%, well, then you have the parameters that the user has passed, and then you have all of the stuff that Apollo link state gives you, and the only thing that we actually need is the cache. So the cache is what React Apollo creates for you, both locally and from stuff that you get from the server. So it's all of the cache that React Apollo has. And the only thing that they did with this package was really create some helper functions to help you deal with the cache, because no one likes caches. Caches are the worst after naming. So we create a new data, because in this case, all that I'm doing is just toggle the modal to true. We'll make a better way of doing this later. And I just say cache.write data, and the data is equal to that data. And that's it. So this is I don't care, like 7 lines or something. This is all that you need to do to actually change something in the base state. And I've been told that you, for the time being, should return null, as in like don't return the cache.write data. And yeah. So now you actually need like the GQL part of the equation, like the GraphQL part of the equation, where it's where you create the mutation that will actually do this, like the GraphQL. And this is all that you need to do. So you name your mutation. You can also not name your mutation. This is mostly for debugging purposes. So you name a mutation, you say mutation open modal, and then you have the open modal, which is the exact same name as there is in here. So the mutation needs to have the same name as the thing that you call it in here. And then you say add client. This is a directive. I think they call it a directive. And this just means that to React Apollo, that they're like, okay, I don't care about what's coming from the server. This is just for the client state. I don't care about anything else. They also have one called REST. They have a bunch of these. But this one just means that it's not going to go to the server for the mutation. Okay, now you actually need the query as well to see if it's open or not. Okay, so the query is this. So you say modal at client, which is the property in your object, and you get the property inside of that object that is modal is open. You can also get the type name if you want. I don't know why you want that, but you can also do that. And then you say add client, and that is it. Okay, so basically we made everything to get this to work, but we didn't actually make it work because we didn't actually call anything. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the query components and the mutation components, the new ones that have like the function as a child render props thing. I don't care about the names, but there's a function and it's a children of the component. So that's a lot of code. Okay, So the first thing that we do is import query from React Apollo, and then we get the modal query that we just defined. That is right here. So that gets a loading, an error, and the actual modal. And in there, we can deconstruct to get the modal is open. And there are things that I did here that you honestly don't really need to do if you're just using local data, which is the loading. If you have a loading on your local data, something is really wrong with your app. Something is really slow and you should fix that. So if loading, you just like return, this is loading. If an error, return like there was an error. And if none of these happens, you return the actual thing that you want to return. I'm using React modal that has a thing called isOpen, and I just pass it true or false in case the modal is open or not. And so first thing is, this is huge. This is a lot of code. And can we make this smaller? So one approach that I tend to do in every project that I work with React Apollo is that I create my very own query, component. So the idea is that I reutilize the query component that I have, and I just use the same loading and the same error, so the only thing that I actually pass down is the data, which makes it a lot smaller. So the way you can actually do, it's very, if you do it once, you just copy and paste it. I have this in one code sandbox, and I just copy and paste it to every project. The problem is finding that code sandbox. So you import query from React Apollo, and you just export it default, so you pass in all the props here, so like the query, the variables, all of the stuff that you want to pass, just pass it all like this, because if you're just going to do it manually, you're going to forget one, probably. I always forget one. So if it's loading, return loading, the error the same. And if none of these things happen, this is what the React Apollo package actually does. It just calls children as a function. And in this case, the only thing that the function actually receives is the data. So the data is basically modal. And now we can use it like this, and it's way smaller. Also, you can remove this div that I have no idea why it's here, and it makes it even smaller. Amazing. So yeah, that looks way better now. And it actually fits in one slide, and it's slightly readable. It's pretty readable. Nice. Yay. But there's actually no modal. Like, we did a whole bunch of shit, but there's no modal on the screen. So we technically did absolutely nothing. So there's also a mutation component. So the mutation component, we get the open modal from the, I usually have the idea of naming all of my things in uppercase. I'm not sure if it's a best practice. Don't know. Don't follow my things, but that's why they're all in uppercase. And I usually create a folder called queries. You can create a folder called Apollo, something like that, because it gets confusing when there's mutation, and it doesn't matter. And so the mutation, the only thing that you actually have to pass this mutation is the mutation. That was kind of confusing, but you only have to pass this. It's the only thing. It's like the query. It's the only property that you actually need to pass. This one only gets more arguments, but they're afterwards, so we don't actually need them. And the only argument that we actually care about is open modal. Open modal is the name that we defined right here. So the mutation's name is open modal, and that's the name of the function that it gets. So it uses that name of the function to actually give us something. So when we click it, it will open the modal. That's it. That's the only thing that we need to do. And this code is actually pretty small. But the thing is, you probably still think that this is too much code. I always think that there is too much code in my code, which usually leads me to create very smart code that not even I understand. But there is this cool thing called the Apollo consumer. Let's use the new fancy React context API thing. Yeah, so it basically uses that under the hood to make it the same thing, but for this. So don't do this for huge updates to the cache, because it gets like out of hand. So ignore everything that I said about the resolvers, because we don't actually need them, and the default state, because we don't actually need that too. Great. Okay, so the Apollo consumer, as I said, works in the same way as the new React context API. So what it does is it creates this new context under the scene, and then we actually get the cache, and on click, we do exactly what we did in the resolver. So that's the only thing that we need to do. We can also use this way. I will advise you this, again, to not do this for huge things, because you will get out of hand. Yeah, but you can do this way too. And you're like, okay, but where is the mutation or anything else? The mutation is created on the fly. So when we do this already, we don't actually need a mutation, because this is a function. So this already sets as a resolver, and it doesn't actually need a mutation. It just changes that value. That's it. And now you're like, can you make the query and the mutation thing fit in one slide? Yes. I actually don't drink alcohol, but yeah. Okay. So you actually only need the query, which is called modal open. And then we have the query component. I removed the important because it didn't actually fit in one slide. I mean, it did, but you couldn't read it. And like from that query, we get the data and we get the client. The client is the cache. You can name it client or cache. I think Apollo usually names it client, but you can name it poop if you want. It's fine. And so you have a button and you have a modal. And when you click the button, it basically does the same thing that I did. And the modal shows if it's open, you get data, that modal open. And that's it, because this is the only thing that is on the data. We have nothing else on the data. But the thing is, the modal doesn't close, and that's kind of annoying. And we need to fix that. So how do we actually fix that? So what I did in this case, just for simplicity's sake, is that I created a function called change state, which gets the cache and gets the value that you want to set it to. And this is all done in the same file except the query. So you get the data in the client, and on click, you change the state to true, which sets the modal open to true. And then on the modal, you get the same thing. And then on request close to the function by React modal, basically you change the state to false. And that's it. You can change this to another file or do something else, but this is the only thing that you need, and this is basically your application state is right here, which is really nice. And I want to talk about two things that they are setting out for the future of a polling state, because this is not on version 1 yet. So the first thing is the type checking. So for the moment, polling state does not have type checking, so you can say that this is a string, but it'll never tell you that it's not. It doesn't care. So one of the things that they want to add is type checking. The problem with adding type checking is that the GraphQL.js part of type checking is huge, apparently. So they're trying to find a way to make it optional for you to add type checking or not, and find a way to make that thing smaller and run on build time instead of the other thing. The other thing is helper components. So this is, if you use the first thing that I said, it is kind of verbose. So they're trying to create helper components that make it really easy, like a get and a set. Kind of like the Apollo consumer, but things that you can use globally. So for Redux, for example, I have used stuff that was like, it just did a get and it did a set and that was it. Like I didn't have a whole bunch of files. All of the other things were created in the background. So they're trying to create those things, which is really nice. And so I have some demos of this. They're both on Code Sandbox. So this is the demo of the exact thing that I just showed you, which is a modal opening. It's amazing. You should totally check it out. And I have a demo that has variables and has like remote data and stuff like that. It uses, I think, the Figma API to get some stuff. And does anyone here use Vue for any reason? No? Okay, I did this in Toulouse, and there were actually people who used Vue. So I actually have a talk about Vue and Apollo, but yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so that is actually what I had to talk about. And if you want to check out the slides that have all the links and stuff, they're up on now.sh. It's link state is dope.now.sh. You can check all the slides that have all the links there. And that's it. Thank you so much for having me. And does anyone have any questions?
Raise your hand to ask a question. Do we have some questions? Yeah, I see the hand.
Yes, thanks for great talk. So, one thing I want to ask you is, imagine one day you come to the project which has actually Apollo client, which you love, but also it has so many things done in Redux.
Oh, no, don't do that.
Exactly.
No. This is mostly like if you start a new, so I had 2 projects before I started being a developer advocate, and they were both for the same company, but one of them we were starting out and the other one was already pretty much done. The first one had Redux, and we were just like, no, this is not worth it, because if it was a huge project. The other one, when we started with the polling state and we just dumped Redux. If you have a small thing, you could try it, but if it's a huge project, just don't. It's,
Okay. I guess it's too late to decide, isn't it?
Sorry.
How do you do form management inside? Is there a handy way to just...
I usually don't send form data to the store, what I usually use is Formic, which is a library by Jared Palmer. Wait, I can go on the internet. There's the internet. So Formic. So Formic is a library by Jared Palmer that what it does is that it uses, oh, there we go. So you get something like this, and this already gets all the values, and on submit, I basically use a mutation from the query, the React Apollo, to send all the values up to the server. So there was Redux form, we've used that, and we had a ton of problems with that, so we all started using Formic as well, and yeah.
Does it work with React Native as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No problem. Wait, I think so. No idea.
Okay, thanks for talk. It was very interesting. I didn't get one thing. For example, imagine you have a lot of bool values for is model open, is second model open, is third model, and so on. And how all these dependencies to components will be managed. For example, if I updated two models and I have third model on the same level of state, and I don't need to get this update for third model because I just updated only two models. It will get resolved due Apollo query or how it?
The way that this works in terms of, there we go. So the way that this works in terms of updating is that it kind of works like the state in React. So if you don't actually use that state and that state gets updated, your component doesn't get updated. So if you have three modals and you're only using one of them in your app, and if you change one for some reason that's not being used in that page, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't actually trigger a re-render to the page.
How these updates get tracked?
Oh, it gets tracked all by the cache. That's the thing. So the thing that they used is the same thing when you use React Apollo with server data. So they use when you use server data, they already have like a gigantic cache that they use to track what has been downloaded, what hasn't been downloaded. And what they do is that they hash all the things that you do. So everything is like imagine that it's not, but imagine that they MD5 your query, and that's what gets passed to the cache as like the key. So it's like a gigantic fucking object that has like all of your queries and all of your mutations like hashed. So every query and every mutation is unique. So if you pass a different variable, it will be a different hash to it. So the way this works is the same way. So when you create a query, so for model 1, you will hash that query and know that it has been done or that it hasn't been done, and that's how it keeps track of what it's been done.
Is it right that on the build time you get resolved all the dependencies for every query, so you each time when new mutation will be dispatched, you know which data you should need to update, right? Something like that.
What? I mean, probably. I don't. What?
Okay, you said that for every query you get unique hash.
Yeah.
For every unique hash you will get dependencies,
Yeah.
which you need to update. So on build time you will get all the dependencies for every component, which you need to
Yeah.
trigger, right?
Yeah.
That's all.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. When you're saying dependence, I thought you were talking like package dependencies. That's why I got confused. But yeah. You get all of that. Yeah.
Do we have other questions? No questions? Then thank you, Sarah, for your talk. It was
Yep.
really, really helpful and amazing.
No problem.